Hi everyone. Uh, just a show of hands, who knows about Elance-oDesk? Okay, good. Who is involved in a marketplace business? Okay, well hopefully it's relevant to everybody. So just a few words about the company. This is not a sales pitch, so most of it is going to be about what we've learned and what I think are the key ways of being successful building a marketplace business. So probably people know this, talent shortage in the world is huge. On one side, you've got companies that are seeking talent. On the other side, you've got people living in places where jobs are not all that interesting, and our job is to connect the two. The company started actually as a distributor team. One of the two founders are Greek. One actually lives in Athens, the other one lived in San Francisco. So they started building this product for themselves, and then eventually built what it is today, which is the leading marketplace for freelance work around the world. Just a few numbers about where we are today. There's about 10 million freelancers in the world, doing close to $1 billion of earning every year, and we pretty much operate in every country and do everything from IT, software development, mobile, gaming, all of that stuff, to non-IT work like marketing, writing, design, translation, customer support, sales, all of that kind of stuff. And then we're actually very present here in the Ukraine. I run the product and engineering team within the company. So just in my team alone, we have close to 100 people here in Kiev and elsewhere in the Ukraine. And generally, we have about 50,000 freelancers in the Ukraine that earn about $60 million a year on the platform. So it's definitely one of our key countries. It also tends to be a country where there's very high satisfaction from clients. So it's definitely one area that we want to continue investing in. That's what I just said. But that's enough about the company. What I thought I would talk about today was more how you build a marketplace, from scratch, and things that we've learned at Odesk. I also worked at eBay for 7 years before, so I've seen the eBay saga a little bit as well. And hopefully some of these tips might be helpful to you guys if you're either investing in marketplace businesses or building marketplace businesses yourself. So probably the first thing, and some of these are buzzwords from Silicon Valley, and I apologize, but hopefully they make sense to people. One of the buzzwords is what people call product market fit. And the idea of product market fit is, as an early stage startup, you want to make sure that the idea that you have that you think is the best idea in the world is something that people actually want to buy, right? And you've reached product market fit when you've got a certain number of people who are actually willing to buy your service. And until you're there, nothing else really matters. And one of the key topics that people talk about these days is do things that don't scale, right? This is not the time when you need to build a huge, sales strategy or spend a lot of money on marketing. Typically, as the founder of an early stage company or the investor that's helping them, you're probably going to be the ones recruiting the first buyers and recruiting the first sellers yourself. You're probably the best, salesperson and the best marketing vehicle there is. Actually, quite possibly, and a lot of marketplaces start that way, you might be the seller yourself. Marketplaces are two-sided businesses. It's hard to start because until you have buyers, you can't get sellers, and until you have sellers, you can't get buyers. One of the ways to break the chicken and egg issue is to be the seller yourself, right? So this is the number one goal for an early stage company, getting to the point where you've recruited a few dozen or a few hundred buyers, a few dozen or a few hundred sellers. Do whatever it takes to get there. Until you're there, it probably doesn't matter all that much. This is also not the stage where market size matters, and I realize investors in the room might always think I need to invest in a quadrillion-dollar business, otherwise it's not useful. In a marketplace, at the beginning, the smaller the market is, the more likely it is that you'll actually get to liquidity, which is the next topic I'm going to be talking about. And so the goal at this stage is really not to focus on something big. If it's a local business, probably what you want to do is a couple of streets, next to where you live. If it's a college type of business and you're a student, then it's probably your university. This is not the time when you need to try to conquer the world and make sure that, you know, whatever works in your city works around the world. You know, like you'll have that time at that point, but the first thing is to get to product market fit. It's also the time to, you know, validate some assumptions about the market. You know, marketplaces tend to do very well when the two sides of the market are very fragmented. So if there's only a small number of buyers or just a small number of sellers in the entire world, then the value that you bring as the intermediary between the buyer and the seller is pretty low. And that's another expression that people have in Silicon Valley is, you know, if you want to be a successful business, you need to sell aspirin, you know, painkiller, not vitamins. Nice to have, you know, like sell something that solves a true pain point. And in marketplaces, what that means is high fragmentation. You know, if you've got millions of buyers on one side trying to meet millions of sellers on the other, typically people can't meet on their own without you being the intermediary. If it's a business where you've only got a handful of buyers, buying from a handful number of sellers, then you're going to bring very little value, and it's going to be really hard for you to be successful. So that's probably phase one, you know, getting to product market fit. Phase two, actually that's going to be the next slide. But the other key things to keep in mind as you build these businesses is to really understand what are the key metrics that are driving the business. And you know, it's easy enough to come up, you know, in this day and age where you have big data and it's easy to pull all sorts of reports. It's easy to get to, like, you know, having hundreds and hundreds of metrics, but at the end of the day, if you do that, you have no idea what you're really doing. So the key thing is to understand the, you know, true key metrics, and typically it's less than 5, that drive your business, and those are the ones that you want to be tracking daily, and they're the ones that you want to be on top of. So to give you an example, at IDCEE and Elance, what we track are things like number of new signups of clients every day, fill rate of jobs, you know, what percentage of jobs are actually being filled, and then success, you know, like when a job does get filled, do the client and the freelancer like the outcome of the contract? So it's only 3, and we're a $1 billion business, right? So if you're a small business, don't start tracking 50. 3 is probably good enough, but then you really need to understand what those 3 really mean and how you can actually change them. One of the characteristics of metrics that tend to matter a lot in marketplace businesses is what's known as leading indicator as opposed to lagging indicator. And as an example, revenue tends to be a lagging indicator. You know, it's the outcome of everything else that happens before. And by the time revenue materializes, it comes from things that you've done a year ago. And so if you did them wrong, then you just lost a year of your life and a year of funding, which, you know, is always hard to catch up on. So try to understand, like, what are the leading indicators that will predict what revenue will look like. So as an example, signups today will generate a lot of revenue in 18 months, right? And that's why we track signups of today. It's very actionable. We can figure out, you know, what are the marketing channels, what are the sales channels that are working for us, fully knowing that, you know, if you acquire this type of client today, you're going to generate this kind of revenue a year and a half from now. You know, another cut of metrics that is pretty essential to master when you're building a marketplace business is cohort analysis. So this, you know, initially when you're brand new, every one of your customers is new, right? And so they all have the same, you know, seniority within your user base, and so they probably all contribute the same amount of revenue. However, what typically happens is over time, you've got recurring users, people who've been in the system for a while, and they tend to have a very different behavior from the new users. And you know, if you've been around for a long time, like eBay, the vast majority of your revenue of today comes from the existing users. You know, like even if your business is growing fast, the new users contribute very little. And the problem with that is if new users are behaving differently, and in particular, if they're not behaving as well as the existing users, then it may take you years before you realize that's happening. And by then it's too late. You know, like if you wait 3 years, then your new users will have become, you know, 50% of your existing user base. And if they don't contribute as much to revenue, or they tend to generate lower quality, then you've wasted 3 years figuring it out. So again, like analyzing cohorts, you know, the people who started in January versus the people who started in February versus the people who started, you know, later, helps you understand early what are the key trends, and if you need to take action, allows you to take action faster. You know, another probably important topic in metrics, and this probably is not just for marketplaces, but it seems to be definitely an issue for marketplace businesses is seasonality. You know, like whatever industry you're operating in, there might be a cycle where buyers spend more money or they're more likely to sign up at certain times in the year than others. And if you're looking at, you know, month-over-month growth as an example, you might be very excited one month and think like, wow, you know, this is huge acceleration, and then get really depressed the next month because it's stagnating or even it's potentially falling. You know, like if you're in retail, it's quite likely that the holiday season is a really big season for you. If you're in recruiting like us, then the holiday season might actually be catastrophic for you because people are, you know, busy shopping for the holiday season. They're not busy recruiting at that point. So understanding seasonality is essential. And probably one thing that's related to it when you look at year-on-year growth rates is to understand what your growth rate looked like the previous year. You know, if you had a stellar October last year, then having the same growth of year-on-year this, you know, October compared to last October might be extremely hard. And conversely, for whatever reason your business was not doing well in October of last year, you might feel very happy that your year-on-year growth rate looks good, but that may be just artificial. It's just a one-month lapping effect. So understanding this is also pretty critical in understanding how your business is doing. So getting back to, you know, the second phase of a marketplace business is what people call liquidity. And again, that's, you know, one of those buzzwords. What does liquidity mean? There's no perfect definition, but it essentially means that, you know, buyers and sellers are likely to find what they want, right? And typically you measure that by some form of conversion rate. You know, in our world, it's what we call fill rate, you know, the percentage of jobs that are actually being filled by a freelancer. And, you know, typically until you get to the, you know, 40, 50, 60% range, you're basically creating more bad experiences than good experiences. You know, if somebody comes to buy in your system and they don't end up buying, they're not going to be very happy about it. And typically unhappy customers tend to tell, you know, all of their friends about how much your site is terrible. And then conversely, when you have a high liquidity, then you start to have, you know, pretty high predictability. As a customer, I know that when I go to this site and I have a specific need, I'm very likely to get what I want. I'm very happy with the results, and I'm more likely to tell other people good things about it. You know, one of the key things about liquidity is you can be very liquid in a subset of your market and very illiquid in another subset of your market. So understanding this by, you know, whatever breakdown of categories you have in your system really matters. And that's another reason for starting small. You know, it's much easier to get to liquidity in a, you know, if it's a local business in a single zone, 5-mile radius. You know, when you see local businesses start, they typically start in a neighborhood and then they get to an entire city. And then when they feel like, okay, I'm ready to scale this, they might launch a couple other cities to know that they know how to replicate their success. And then eventually, you know, like Airbnb and Uber and all those guys, you know, start launching new cities every day because they have the cookie cutter approach to it. But really liquidity, you know, until you're there, it's not the time to expand your business. It's the time to actually focus on that particular area until you feel like you've nailed it. And then it's, you know, at that point that you can scale. You know, the other thing that's important in a marketplace business is you've got two sides. You've got buyers and sellers. And so liquidity works both ways, right? You need to have the right balance between demand and supply. And, you know, it's very different for different marketplaces, but typically one side is easier to fill than the other. You know, like if you look at our example, there's many more people in the world that are looking for jobs than jobs that are available, right? So getting a lot of freelancers on the marketplace has always been relatively easy. Getting a lot of clients on the marketplace, on the other hand, tends to be the bottleneck. So really understanding, you know, where those trade-offs are can help you decide, you know, where to focus more of your energy. That being said, you know, quantity is only one factor. At the end of the day, what you need is not the right number of freelancers or the right number of sellers on your marketplace. You need to have the right type of freelancers, you know, like, you know, there are categories for us, for instance, in mobile, you know, where mobile development is actually seller constrained. We have more buyers, you know, people who want to build a mobile game or a mobile app, than we have qualified freelancers who know and have, you know, demonstrated that they can build mobile apps. So even in a, you know, a market that is somewhat supply constrained, there might be categories where the constraint is actually, you know, buyer supplied or the opposite. So the, you know, the other really big topic for marketplaces is around trust. You know, at the end of the day, you know, if you go back to when eBay got started, which, you know, arguably is probably the first successful online marketplace in the world, you know, historically, at the beginning it was a crazy idea, right? I mean, why on earth would a buyer and a seller who don't know each other and have no reason to trust each other start exchanging, you know, some amount of value? You know, as a seller, you're selling an item, shipping it over the mail system, hoping that the buyer is going to pay you. And as a buyer, you're going to pay, hoping that you receive the goods and that the goods are actually what you think they're going to be. And you know, people are obviously more comfortable doing this today than they were 15 years ago, but it remains a key pain point and one that should be, you know, a top focus for a marketplace, is building this trust, breaking the fear of both the buyer and the seller that, you know, things are not going to go the way they want them to and that they're going to get ripped off. And there's, you know, all sorts of techniques that marketplaces have used over the years. I'm a product guy, so I'm talking more about product things, but if you're a marketer, there's all sorts of things around branding that really matter. You know, eBay stands for something, and it's really hard to change your brand. You know, like no matter how you invest in product to, you know, change the features, change the pricing, and all of that stuff, once your brand means something in the mind of the consumer, it's relatively hard to change. On the product side, there's, you know, several components that can help with trust. Probably the most recent one that marketplaces have been using is what's known as social proof. And the idea behind social proof is I don't necessarily trust what a random person is saying about, you know, the marketplace or about the seller, but I'm much more likely to trust people that I know, right? And in this day where social graphs are everywhere, you know, like Facebook is there, Twitter is there, LinkedIn, what have you, being able to say, you know, so-and-so person who you know somehow has, you know, recommended this marketplace or recommended this particular seller leads to a, you know, very significant amount of trust. You know, and if you look at how Airbnb handles it, you know, like you can find the rooms that an Airbnb, you know, buyer who happens to be a friend of yours has recommended, and that, you know, usually makes you feel a lot better than just, you know, random person that you don't know likes the room that the seller is selling. So it doesn't work for every business. You know, in our example, I don't think we've reached the scale where you would be likely to find people that you know who would recommend a freelancer. You know, the market is a little bit too fragmented for this to work. But if you're building something a little bit more local, or something that maybe a slightly more, you know, niche and targeted market, it might be something that works extremely well. You know, there's an example in the US, there's a company that focuses on finding babysitters for parents. And, you know, like trusting a stranger to take care of your kids is pretty scary. And so when you sign up, they ask you questions like, you know, which soccer team does your kid belong to, which school do they go to, and then they tell you, hey, this babysitter has been recommended by such and such parent that you might know. And that's extremely reassuring for parents, and that's how they build trust. You know, other classic ways of building trusts, one of them is building a feedback system. And, you know, it's a classic. You ask people to leave a, you know, 5-star score between 1 and 5. And it's actually much harder than people think. And there's essentially 2 reasons for it. One is wrong incentives. You know, me as a buyer, if I don't like the seller, I'm just never going to be using them again. And I don't really find a particularly compelling reason to tell everybody else. And so you find that getting trustworthy feedback from buyers and sellers in a marketplace is actually relatively hard. And if you're collecting feedback that is not trustworthy, then it's actually misleading. You know, having a provider that's, you know, got 5-star feedback, but ultimately is not all that reliable, ends up, you know, destroying trust much more than it builds trust. And so finding mechanisms to encourage users to be truthful and making sure that you can filter out the noise from the real signal is pretty critical in building a feedback system. You know, one example that, you know, has been done by several companies recently is to have essentially 2 feedback scores, one that is public, you know, please tell the world what you think about this particular individual, and another one that's private, which is please tell us what you think about that individual. And using the difference between those 2 signals can be extremely powerful for the marketplace to actually understand what the quality of that particular buyer or seller might really be. Another key feature that you want to build is a dispute resolution mechanism. If the buyer and the seller don't agree on something, there needs to be some kind of mediation system where ideally you don't get involved, the two parties just talk about it, but ultimately if they can't get to an agreement, then you need to get involved. And that's probably one of the key things about building trust is having a great customer support team that is empowered to make decisions, not robots, and is willing to take losses. At the end of the day, it doesn't always work out. Sometimes the buyer is fraudulent, sometimes the seller is fraudulent, sometimes nobody is fraudulent, but just there's a general misunderstanding. And the economics of a marketplace tend to be relatively rich, and you should design inside of your business model the fact that you're going to be taking losses. At the end of the day, somebody's going to lose money. It's either going to be you or the buyer or the seller. And if it's the buyer or the seller, then you've created A, you've probably lost a customer. B, you've probably lost a lot of other customers because they're going to say horrible things about you. If, on the other hand, you end up taking the loss, then usually people are not happy, even if they didn't lose money. They're not happy with the fact that they didn't get what they were here for, but you're less likely to generate a really bad outcome. So like building that into your business model, understanding that there's going to be something like 1% of transaction volume that is going to go to your books as opposed to losses in the system is pretty essential. Another key thing that is maybe a little bit more of a recent development, and definitely when early on at eBay we didn't have the technology to do this, is what's known as experimentation, right? One of the things that's pretty unique about marketplace businesses compared to, let's say, a regular e-commerce website is the fact that you have two different stakeholders, a buyer and the seller, and they're both in there for their own business, not for you and not for the other guy. And it's a little bit like when governments change the tax rules. You think that you know what's going to happen, but people change their behaviors to maximize their own utility, their own profits. And therefore, these businesses are hard to predict. If you change pricing, you change rules around dispute resolution, you change features on the site itself, you might predict that things are going to go one way, but really different users are going to start using the site. Some people that used to be using it are going to leave because they don't like what you changed. Other people that weren't using the site are going to come in, and then people that stay might still change their behavior. And these things tend to be really hard to predict, and unless you have a way of experimenting, you're always going to be, guessing and hoping, but typically you're going to be a little bit scared about what happens to your business. Nowadays, there's all sorts of tools to build, A/B testing infrastructure, so being able to test, one version of your product against another, and you should definitely build those. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is, again, it's a connected business, right? There are two parties. And unless you're able to isolate a sub-market, like a part of your business that is somewhat self-contained and where you can do the experiment is going to bleed over to other parts of the market. So, it's easier for like local businesses. Like if you take eBay used to experiment a lot in Australia. Australia is a fairly self-contained business. It's relatively small. So if you mess it up, it doesn't impact the business too much. But it's also a relatively good predictor for what the rest of the world is going to look like. So you do your experiment in Australia. If it fails, then you stop it. If it succeeds, then you run it in the rest of the world. Another, important things about marketplace businesses, people always talk about the long tail, another big buzzword. And I think people tend to forget what it really means. Long tail means that distributions in marketplaces tend to not be normally distributed. So sorry if I'm a geek here, and it sounds like, reminds you of statistics and applied math that you might have taken in college. But a lot of tools that are designed to do experiments and measuring A/B tests assume that distributions are normal. And when you have a long tail distribution, which is known as a log normal distribution, all of these tools fail. So I'm not going to go and do a stats course here, but you should find people that are experts at this, because otherwise what you might find is you think that an experiment is better than the control group, and it turns out that that's not the case at all. And unless you understand the math behind it, you're going to make a lot of really wrong decisions. So another advanced topic, which again has been a little bit of a recent development in the marketplace business, we we all used to build marketplaces that looked a little bit like classifieds websites, you know, like sites like, you know, Gumtree or Craigslist, where essentially every buyer could buy, every seller could sell. We would show, you know, items by the order in which they appeared, you know, whole list. And it's a little bit Darwinian, you know, like some people get lucky and they have a great experience. Some people are naive and they have a bad experience. And the marketplace was really passive about it. If you look at modern marketplaces, they tend to be controlling the ecosystem a lot more. And one of the ways you control is what's known as matching, right? And the idea behind matching is to say, we don't have to show every buyer to every seller, and we don't have to show every seller to every buyer. And in fact, you know, on the internet, it's typically pretty easy to get people to do what you need them to do. So if you have a strong belief that this particular seller should be matched with this particular buyer, you can build user experiences that really promote those kinds of matches. And the key technology behind this is data science, right? At the end of the day, as your site becomes big enough, you've got tons of data about past behaviors, you know, who are the best buyers for specific types of goods, who are the best sellers for specific types of goods. And the goal is to learn over time using, you know, machine learning algorithms and become really good at understanding who you need to match against whom. Probably not something you do early on, but as the business grows, that's probably one of the biggest competitive advantage you can build against competitors. You know, like big data, whoever has the biggest amount of data wins. And if you're the #1 player in this space and you're really good at it, it's incredibly hard for somebody to catch up. You know, another topic that's been pretty hot lately is around curation. And this one is, you know, a little bit of an art, I would say, at this stage. I don't think there's a lot of science. But the idea behind curation is to say, you choose who participates in your marketplace. You know, not everybody has the right to sign up either as a buyer or as a seller. You should be able to have rules that define who is welcome on the marketplace and who is not. And, you know, the key trade-off here is if you do this too early and you do it you know, maybe a little bit too strong, then you're going to kill your growth, right? If you suddenly block, you know, 90% of the buyers or 90% of the sellers from participating, then it's going to be really hard for your business to grow. The converse to that is if you don't do it at all, you're really not in control of the quality of the marketplace. And if you're trying to target a, you know, slightly high-end segment or people that have expectations around quality and predictability of outcomes, and you let everybody go through, you might destroy your brand. And as you know, as I said earlier, once your brand is destroyed, it doesn't really matter how good your product is. Nobody's going to trust you anymore. And so there's that trade-off of, you know, if you do it too early, you kill your growth. If you do it too late, you kill your brand. And there's no science behind this. It's really just, you know, keeping an eye on it and thinking about what is the right time to introduce curation into the marketplace. But knowing that it needs to happen at some point. There is a point where the number of new entrants in the marketplace is such that you have to control who, you know, gets to participate and who needs to get out. And then, of course, you know, there's the topic of how do you make money. And the idea here is it's not just how you build revenue for the company. It's also how you select which kinds of participants are going to be successful or not, right? So there's several classic monetization strategies for marketplaces. You know, some people do a subscription model. Some people do a listing fee model where to post a job or to apply to a job, you need to pay money. And some marketplaces do a transaction fee model where you take a cut of every transaction. And of course, you can have a hybrid. You know, in the case of Elance, we have all three of them combined. And then, of course, you can have a marketplace where the buyer pays, you can have a marketplace where the seller pays, and you can have a marketplace where both parties are paying. And I think the point here is it's not just about how you generate money for the company, it's also like how do you build the right incentives for the people that you really want to go after to stay in the marketplace. So to give you an example, on IDCEE today, we take a 10% transaction fee, right? That's the only way we monetize. Now, the problem with that is you know, we have jobs at $3 an hour where a 10% fee is 30 cents an hour, and that's incredibly cheap, and we're probably leaving a ton of money on the table. And then we have experts that charge, you know, $150 an hour, and then we charge them $15 an hour of fees, and they tend to think that it's outrageous, right? So we don't have a particularly good pricing model from the standpoint of being able to address both the low-end side of the market and the high-end side of the market. So these things really matter, because what happens in our case is the high-end tends to, disintermediate. Basically, they want to work on their own, whereas the low-end is basically, willing to pay a lot more, and we're not being able to capture that demand. And so, like, building the right incentives here goes beyond just, building revenue for the company. It goes into essentially self-selection. People will come to the marketplace if they're better off working with you than not working with you. And if you build the right pricing structure, then you'll be able to attract and retain the customers that you want. If you build the wrong pricing structure, then it's going to be the exact opposite. And then, payments is a pretty critical piece of a marketplace business. If you've been following the news, eBay is finally spinning off PayPal after, acquiring it 12 years ago. And the reason why PayPal stayed with eBay for such a long time is because payments is an intrinsic part of the marketplace. And it's different depending on how you monetize the business, but essentially this is where a lot of complexity happens, particularly if you're doing a global marketplace. If you're operating in one country, payments might be relatively simple. If you're trying to operate in multiple countries, then you need to either have somebody in-house that really understands payments, or you need to work with companies like PayPal that are able to give you the international scale. It also is a place that tends to be regulated. So when you're early stage, you may not care. You might just say, we'll figure this out later. But just so you know, like, at some point, you're going to get to the scale where in every country where you operate, the regulator has an opinion about how payments should be handled in their own country. And that's, pretty much the last thing here is patience. Like, marketplace businesses tend to be creating an enormous amount of value, both for your shareholders as well as for the users. Some of the biggest companies in the world these days are marketplace businesses. However, they rarely take off overnight. And if you look at the history of most successful businesses, like, you can include Airbnb as probably one of the recent ones, or even Elance-oDesk are both 10-year-old companies. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of capital. Because getting to liquidity takes a while, and there's this, like, spinning wheel, which, takes a while to get spinning, but then as soon as it starts to really take off, it really takes off and creates a lot of value for users. And so, just to finish, because I will have a little bit of a sales pitch, I would say two things. One is we're hiring, and we're hiring a lot here in the Ukraine. So if engineers, product managers, designers who might be interested in joining us, we'd love to talk to them. And then the second thing is, we actually use our own business a lot. Most of my team are freelancers that work on oDesk. Most of our operations team are freelancers that are, curating the marketplace, looking for, good buyers and good sellers. And we found this to be incredibly useful in building a marketplace business. So if you're building yours, consider using us to, build and grow the business. And that's pretty much all I had. Thank you.